Hey guys, and welcome back to Blind Crime. With cases like these, you'll never see it coming. I want to give a very quick apology for the delay in this week's episode. I know it was supposed to go out at midnight on Friday. It is now Friday night, and I'm just getting around to recording this, but I had some type of food poisoning or something this week, and it just completely threw me off. So I do apologize, but we're here now. Everything is good. And that's all that matters. This is also our first episode post-CrimeCon. So if you are here because I met you at CrimeCon, welcome to the crazy show. All aboard the Hot Mess Express. That's one of my favorite sayings. So welcome. It is so amazing to have you here. Thank you so much for your support. It means so much to me, and I really hope that you enjoy the show. CrimeCon itself was something else. I really have no other way to explain it. It was crazy. It was awesome. I got to meet some of my favorite content creators. I got to connect with so many people. It was just awesome. Being able to volunteer was a lot more strenuous than I expected it to be, but it was absolutely worth it to be able to be in that environment. I am so hoping that I will be able to be on Creator Row in Denver, but we will see what happens. If I'm not on Creator Row, then unfortunately I won't be able to go to Denver, but we'll just have to wait and see. So keep your fingers crossed. Let's hope that things work out. If not, then hopefully you guys will still stick around and listen to me ramble about these cases that I bring to you every 2 weeks. All right, so with that being said, we are going to jump into this week's case. So this case is coming from across the pond once again, but this week, we are going to the land down under. Fun. So if you will take your seat in the time machine, we are going to travel back to the heart of millennials, the decades that made us all, the 1980s and the 1990s. Rachel Barber was born September 12, 1983. From a very young age, her parents, Elizabeth and Michael Barber, knew that their daughter was born for greatness. Growing up in a small town outside of Victoria, Australia, Rachel was enrolled in a toddler's dance class, and she excelled at it. According to the Casual Criminalist, Rachel's dance teacher told her parents that they needed to move closer to this school called the Dance Factory so that Rachel could attend. I don't know if maybe the school zones wouldn't let her go there. I don't know how that works in Australia, but with little hesitation, the Barber family packed up and moved into a nice neighborhood closer to this school. While money was tight for the family, both Elizabeth and Michael working full-time jobs, they did everything that they could to make sure that Rachel was able to stay in the dance factory and have everything she needed, leotards, shoes, all that good stuff, and also keep bills paid, a roof over their head, and food on the table. Shortly after moving into their new neighborhood, the Barbers would meet the Reed family, a married couple with 2 daughters, one being the same age as one of Rachel's younger sisters. The resources didn't specify which sister, though. And the other Reed daughter, Caroline, who was 5 years older than her sister and 4 years older than Rachel Barber. The two families really hit it off, the 2 younger girls becoming very close friends, and Caroline eventually becoming the Barber's babysitter for Rachel and her sisters. It was kind of the ideal situation for both families, and the relationship continued to grow and build over the next several years. However, the happy ending the Reed family had hoped for didn't pan out, and Mr. Reed filed for divorce. Because of this, the Reed family had no choice but to move into a smaller, more affordable home, leaving their friends and neighbors behind. After time, the Reeds and the Barbers completely lost contact with one another. Just a fond memory of old friends remained. That was life, though, and life always has a funny way of moving on. In the early part of 1999, Rachel, who had just turned 15 the September before, begged her parents to let her drop out of school and attend the dance factory full-time. I had to look up how the school's system worked in Australia because the way that it was presented in my research, it was kind of weird to me. So in Australia, and somebody, if you're listening from Australia, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But according to Google, it says that Australian schools go from late January until about mid-December, so right before Christmas. So it would have been probably early January whenever Rachel asked if she could not go back to school, public school, and just attend the dance factory. It was very clear that Rachel didn't like school. It's not that she wasn't good at school. She had good grades and everything, but she just didn't like it. She knew that she wasn't going to use a formal education as a means of a career. She already knew that she wanted to dance, and she was already making money dancing. So why couldn't she just go to school at the dance factory full time instead of taking dance classes there? And so after a lot of conversation, Elizabeth and Michael agreed that she could drop out of school, but Elizabeth told her that she was either going to have to find a job or go back to school because she wasn't going to bum around the house and just freeload off of them for the remainder of the time that she was off school. Rachel did end up trying to find a job, but she was only 15 at the time, and nobody really wanted to hire a 15-year-old, so she really couldn't find anything. And whenever that didn't work out, she went to the dance factory and she decided to plead her case, and they told her to come back the next week to start her classes. Now, Rachel had already been at the dance factory for several years now, part-time, just taking classes. But being there full-time was going to give her the time and the ability to perfect her craft and practice and work and hopefully be able to make it in the big world of dance. She had a lot of friends there, and she even had a boyfriend whose name was Manny. Despite the fact that they were young, Rachel and Manny were really serious. Rachel had already brought him to her family get-togethers, and even her parents thought that he was a really good guy. They liked Manny, and they thought that he and Rachel were going to be the kind of couple who could really stand the test of time. So let's focus in on Rachel a little bit more. Rachel was beautiful, like movie star model kind of beautiful. She was small, she was petite, she had long, dark hair, and just beautiful, beautiful green eyes. She also had an air of grace that just kind of radiated off of her. She didn't walk, she glided. She didn't just turn around, she twirled. She was a true dancer through and through. She was around 5 feet tall. Her hair was straight. Like I said, dark, big green eyes. She looked a lot like, in my opinion, Rose McGowan from the movie Jawbreakers. That's such a great movie, by the way. Her eyes just captured and captivated, holding you in place like they could see the deepest, darkest parts of your soul. Despite this, though, Rachel was actually quite shy, and she was, and I mean this in no victim-blaming or shaming kind of way, naive. She was just 15, and when you're that young, you are naive. You think you're invincible and that nothing can hurt you, and you think that you have your whole life ahead of you and nothing can stop you. You don't worry about dying or death. your biggest worry is what the latest fashion trends are and if you'll be able to get the money from your parents to buy the hottest new item that drops in stores next week. And Rachel was no different in that sense. And since the Barber family didn't have a lot of money, Rachel wasn't able to go shopping and do all the fun things her friends would do. Manny took her out on dates and to the movies, and the two would go out often, but Rachel didn't expect him to buy her new clothes or shoes or the things she needed for dance. So when Rachel needed some new pants for dance, she was happily surprised when her mom gave her the money to go. She was so excited, she immediately made plans with her friends, and Manny and they would all go shopping. It was a rare occurrence, and she just could not wait. Life went on as normal for Rachel. Dancing, time with Manny, talking to Manny on the phone. They were the kind of couple who would be with each other all day and then spend the rest of the night on the phone until one of them fell asleep. They loved each other and couldn't get enough of each other in person or on the phone. So when the phone rang one night and Rachel answered and stayed on the line for several hours, Elizabeth and Michael thought she was talking to Manny. It was their usual routine, and no one really complained about it. The night ended as usual, and the next day, Rachel woke up and got ready to go to the dance factory per the norm, her dad dropping her off at the trolley station. Fun fact, in Australia, they have trolleys, like in San Francisco. I did not know that. But that's how Rachel would get to and from her dance classes. One of her parents would drop her off at the trolley of a morning and then come and pick her up after they got off work. She didn't drive, and she hated to walk. She was afraid of walking alone, especially at night, which totally understandable. So the trolley was the best way for her to get from A to B. On this day, March 1st, 1999, Michael had dropped Rachel off at the trolley station and went about his day. When he returned to pick Rachel up after he got off work, Rachel was nowhere to be found. While Rachel's life had continued to thrive, Caroline Reed had been struggling in every single aspect. Caroline wasn't anything like Rachel. She was taller, thicker, had long, curly, light-colored hair, and simple brown eyes. She wasn't, quote, beautiful like Rachel. Caroline would journal, and in her journal, she would often refer to herself as pizza face and a disappointment to herself and her parents. She hated herself, the way she looked, the way her brain worked. She knew she had issues, but she didn't know what they were or how to address them. She would lock on to people and idolize them, pretending if she could just be them, then her life would be so much better. She longed for her parents, especially for her dad, to be proud of her, to want her, to love her. No one knew it at the time, but even when Caroline was babysitting the Barber girls, she looked at them with envy and malice, especially Rachel. To Caroline, Rachel was everything she herself wasn't. Rachel was small and thin and beautiful. She was graceful, elegant, and kind. She had her life put together when Caroline's was, in theory, like a spilled purse on the subway. The contents of her life were strewn all over the place, her emotions, her thoughts, her actions. And even though she was several years older than Rachel, Caroline was jealous of Rachel's effortlessness to be exceptional. She harbored those feelings and that envy of Rachel for a very long time. Even after moving away from the Barbers, Caroline still thought of Rachel often, obsessing over her, telling herself that she could change into Rachel if she just tried hard enough. She even decided to do a school project on Rachel, who I believe was 9 or 10 at the time, and wanted her birthday, her social security number, or whatever the equivalent is in Australia. She wanted all of her personal information just at a very young age, and no one really thought it was weird at the time, but we'll find out that it was actually quite weird. Caroline's mental state was not good, and that was something everyone could see, even Caroline. Like I said, she knew she wasn't in a good place, but she didn't know how to help herself or ask for help. Whenever she had breakdowns, which were many and occurred often, her father was called, and her father wasn't one to show Caroline much affection or support. When he and Caroline's mother divorced in her younger years, Caroline placed a lot of that blame on herself. She felt like it was her mental issues that made her father leave. In her mind, if she could just be better, be normal, her father would love her and things would go back to normal. However, a while after the divorce, her father would remarry and have a life with his new wife and stepchildren. He was still in Caroline's life, but he wasn't there. He wasn't present. He never really had been. Coming from someone who has daddy issues, I totally get that. The effect of a dad who is there but isn't present is hard. And even Caroline's mother didn't know how to be close to her daughter, though. The parent-child relationship was just broken all the way around in the family. Caroline was a mess, and the resources to help her clean herself up just weren't offered to her. One day, while out shopping, Rachel and Michael ran into Caroline's mother and Caroline's younger sister. They stopped and talked and caught up for a while, and then Caroline came around. She and Rachel talked like they had been friends forever, never skipping a beat. To Rachel, it was like seeing an old friend. For Caroline, a light bulb went off. The families went their separate ways, and just like before, everything went on as usual. Until the night of February 28th, 1999. That night, Caroline made a phone call. That night, Rachel received a phone call. The plan was set in place, and under strict warning of Caroline, Rachel was told no one could know, not even Manny, about what they were going to do. Everyone went to sleep that night, expecting a normal day, except for Rachel and Caroline. Rachel thought she was going to make some money the next day, and Caroline had successfully baited her victim. The next morning, Rachel got up and ready for her classes at the dance factory. Her dad dropped her off at the trolley station, and they agreed to meet back at the station at 6 p.m. for Rachel to be picked up. She knew she wouldn't be there, though, but what was a little white lie? She'd be there a little bit later and come up with an excuse. She knew she couldn't tell her dad about the job Caroline had for her because Caroline told her not to, but she wasn't too worried. She knew that she could come up with something. Her day went on, and she did end up telling Manny that she had a job that night after classes, but she wouldn't tell him any details of it or who it was with. It was just a job, she said. I'm going to make $100 and I'll be able to buy the stuff that I want. I'll call you tonight, she said, as she walked towards the meeting place her and Caroline had agreed upon the night before. They'd planned to meet up and pick up dinner, then go back to Caroline's apartment, where Caroline would then perform a psychological study on Rachel. The gig paid $100, and it was a simple job. They'd do some breathing exercises, Caroline would ask her some questions, and everything would be done and over with in no time. And Caroline also said that she had some clothes that she wanted to give Rachel. Rachel was beyond excited. Caroline had gone through all of the steps, and she knew her plan would succeed. And so the pair picked up their food and headed back to Caroline's apartment. When Rachel wasn't looking, Caroline loaded her food down with an antihistamine of sort, Benadryl or something similar, something that would make her sleepy. They sat down in Caroline's living room and ate, chatting about dance and Manny and what the two had been up to since they'd last seen each other, and Caroline even told Rachel that she could go ahead and try on some of the clothes that she was going to give her. It was all in good fun, Rachel thought. She had no reason to suspect that Caroline had drugged her food or had lured her there to kill her. After they finished their food, Caroline decided it was time to start the, quote, tests she'd asked Rachel to participate in. She told Rachel to close her eyes and to breathe in and out, in and out. Think happy thoughts, she told Rachel. Rachel was in her zone, breathing in and out, probably thinking of dancing and of Manny and all the things that she loved, when all of a sudden, Rachel had something tight around her throat. Caroline was on her knees behind her, a phone cord wrapped snugly around her neck. Caroline pulled on the cord tighter and tighter and tighter, until she finally pulled so tight the two girls were lying on the floor. Caroline's grip on the phone cord wasn't loosening, though, and Rachel was slowly losing air. The struggle continued for several minutes until Rachel finally stopped breathing. Her eyes, once bright and beautiful, full of hopes and dreams, were now locked in her last moments of fear and confusion, unable to blink, unable to move. She was gone. When Caroline realized that Rachel was dead, she took her body and she put it inside her wardrobe, where she would keep it for several days. Back at the trolley station, Rachel's father was becoming more and more concerned. He went to a nearby payphone and called home, asking his wife if Rachel was there. Immediately, Elizabeth knew something was wrong, but Michael tried to reassure her, and Elizabeth told him to go to the other trolley station on the opposite side of town. Whenever she would pick up or drop off Rachel, that's where she would take her, since that's where she worked. Maybe Rachel just got confused, they thought. So Michael drove to the other station, but when Rachel wasn't there, Elizabeth frantically began calling Rachel's friends and her boyfriend Manny. Manny said that Rachel had told him she had a job that night after classes, but he didn't know where the job was or who it was with. Her friends had no idea where she could be. After receiving this information, Elizabeth called the police to report their daughter missing. Like usual, the police said that since it hadn't been more than 24 hours, at this point it had only been about an hour, there wasn't much that they could do, and since Rachel didn't tell anyone where she was going, they had no leads as to where to look. I'll also add that since it was 1999, cell phones weren't super popular unless you were wealthy or worked somewhere that was phasing out pagers and beepers and gave you a cell phone instead. According to the movie In Her Skin, based on the events of Rachel's life and murder, the police didn't want to search for Rachel, and the Barber family had to fight to get the police to search for her, even days after she went missing. Articles that I've read, on the other hand, have stated that police were, quote, frantically searching for Rachel. I couldn't find anything to confirm or deny the police's involvement. However, there was an investigation that eventually happened, and that we do know. And it wouldn't take long at all for police to discover something that was curious, not only to them, but to the Barbers. After doing some digging, police were able to pull phone records from the Barbers. They found that on the night of February 28th, the Barbers received a call from someone with the last name Robertson. When they asked if they knew anyone named Caroline Robertson, they said no, but they knew a Caroline Reed. Everything then began to fall into place. Michael remembered that he had run into Caroline and her mother and sister weeks before. He hadn't mentioned it to Elizabeth, which to me is odd, but might be normal to others. When Caroline could be positively identified as a person of interest, the police went to her apartment. Again, little is known about the happenings when police went into Caroline's apartment, but they did find notebooks, journals, full of detailed writings of her envy of Rachel, how perfect she was compared to herself, how she was going to kill Rachel, her plan to essentially take over Rachel's identity. She'd gone so far as to have passports and IDs made with Rachel's name and information, but Caroline's own face. She was going to steal Rachel's identity and take her on as her own persona. There were clothes strewn across the living room, most of which were deciphered to be too small for Caroline. There was also green hair dye on the coffee table, a color that neither Rachel nor Caroline had in their hair at the time of Rachel's disappearance. When speaking with Caroline's father, police did ask if there was anywhere she could have taken Rachel, and there were still no signs of Rachel, and for the Barbers, not all hope was lost. They believed that Rachel was simply being held against her will, not that she was gone. But Caroline's father owned a home out of town, a vacation holiday home, you could say. Caroline would sometimes go to his house when she'd have one of her meltdowns, so it was a good place to search the property for Rachel. Upon their search, they found Rachel in a shallow grave. Her body had been wrapped in 2 floor rugs, the phone cord still tight around her neck. Caroline had rolled Rachel's body up in the rugs and stuffed her into a duffel bag before calling a taxi and going to her father's out-of-town property. Caroline was then arrested for Rachel's kidnapping and murder, and in 2000 she was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The story doesn't quite end here yet, though. A while after being sentenced, Caroline's mom came to visit her. Her mother said she couldn't believe the change she saw in Caroline. She was thinner, her hair was darker, there was something in her eyes. Something she says in an article with the Herald Sun, there was a Rachel likeness to her, which is just freaky. In the same article, it is said that Caroline never once spoke of her crimes or of Rachel while in prison. And yes, in 2014, after only serving 14 years of her 20-year sentence, Caroline was released from prison. Rachel's parents don't believe that Caroline is a danger to them, but they do worry about others who might fall prey to Caroline's antics. They said in the same Herald Sun article mentioned earlier that they didn't want anyone harassing Caroline because they didn't want anyone to get hurt. And in their eyes, justice would never be served because their daughter was already dead. Nothing could fix that. I have no further updates on Caroline or what has happened with her life since she's been released from prison. I hope that she was able to get the help that she needed because she clearly had issues. In one article that I read, it was stated that Caroline had a personality disorder and body dysmorphia, but there wasn't a defined personality disorder. I'll also note here that it was quickly discovered that Caroline had taken on her mother's surname, Robertson, after her parents' divorce, hence why I referred to her as Caroline Reed until now. There are also no updates on Rachel's family since 2014. The only thing I could find was about Manny. It was said that he still thinks about Rachel and suffers from severe anxiety because of what happened to her. And I think I'd probably have severe anxiety too if my husband was kidnapped and murdered. Heck, I already have severe anxiety and nothing like that has happened to me, thank God. I know we talked a lot about Caroline, but now I want to bring it back to Rachel. Rachel was vibrant, she was talented, and she was going to go so far in life. She had everything ahead of her, becoming an adult, getting married, having kids if she wanted to, and of course, her dancing career. She was going to be famous, and it's absolutely heartbreaking that her fame had to come from her death. The reason I chose this case is because Rachel couldn't see the danger that was right in front of her. She was blind to the plans Caroline had in store for her. Rachel, as a child, was naive, and again, I don't mean that in any way victim blaming or shaming. Kids are just naive. And that's why kids, your parents are strict and hard on you sometimes. And parents, that's why you have to look out for your kids. Wisdom comes with age, and when you tell your mom, you don't understand, listen to me. They may not understand the exact situation, but they understand keeping you safe. If your parent tells you no, you can't go do this because it doesn't sound like a good idea, I promise you, they are not doing it because they are trying to ruin your life and ruin your fun. They're trying to keep you safe and keep you alive. I'm not a parent, but I have 10 nieces and nephews, and you better believe that as they grow up and as they get older, I am going to do whatever I can to protect them. No matter how mad they get at me, no matter how much they yell at me and scream, Aunt T is the reinforcer. But I will also spoil those babies like it's nobody's business. I say all of this to say that we have to look out for each other. Especially in the world today, no one is safe or exempt from being hurt. And we are all blind to a degree, but if we can help each other in those blind spots, we will be a heck of a lot better off. All right, guys, that is all that I have for the case of Rachel Barber. I have linked all of the articles in the show notes. There is also a video, the video from the Casual Criminalist on YouTube that is linked below. If you have any questions about the case, feel free to let me know. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe or follow button depending on where you're listening at. And if you like what you hear, go ahead and leave me a 5-star review because that really helps me out. If you'd like to help support the podcast financially without the reoccurring monthly charge, visit the link in the show notes at buymeacoffee.com/blindcrimepod. Also, follow me on all the socials, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. All of those will also be in the show notes, as well as my new website, blindcrimepod.com. All right, guys, that's all I have for this week. So until next time, keep your eyes open.